even though the Oakland Coliseum arena, or the complex, the sports complex, even though Finley was a tenant with the A's, they endorsed Jerry Seltzer to buy the team because they dealt with Finley on a day-to-day basis and knew what a nightmare he was to deal with. He was extremely thrifty in that he didn't want to hire many people. People who worked at the A's also had to do double duty working for the Seals as well. So it was a very tiny operation. He didn't like to spend a lot of money, but it says something when the sports complex where your baseball team is situated as doesn't want that guy to be the owner of a new hockey franchise and actually endorses somebody else.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hi, this is Tim Hanlon. I am the host and curator of this little podcast we call Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to the exploration of what used to be in professional sports. And I thank you for trying us out and listening and putting us into your earbuds. We appreciate all of your comments and suggestions that we've heard thus far in our fledgling first few weeks. You can always get all your Good Seats Still Available needs served at our website, which is goodseatsstillavailable, all one word, .com. You can follow us on Twitter at Good Seats Still. You can also find us on Instagram and what's the other one? Oh yeah, Facebook. And if you come to our website, you can sign up for our email newsletter, send us a comment, a suggestion, whatever. So thank you. Keep them coming, and lots more good stuff to come, and we appreciate it. We subsist on your comments, suggestions, and your listenership. So thank you. This week's guest is Mark Greczmiel. He has been a longtime television producer, writer, director in LA and Canada for a number of TV networks, but his current labor of love is something that we'll be exploring a little bit later here in the show. It's called The California Golden Seals Story. It is a documentary about the 9-year journey of a team that actually existed, for those of you young enough not to remember, in the National Hockey League, starting around 1967 and met its demise in 1976. For those of you who are San Jose Sharks fans today in the NHL, or even Dallas Stars fans in the NHL today, you owe a debt of gratitude to the team that was at its end known as the California Golden Seals, but also in various incarnations was known as the Oakland Seals and the California Seals. As they say, you can look it up, but before you do, give a listen to my interview and conversation with Mark Greczmiel, who spent quite a bit of time creating what I thought was a quite fascinating story about a team that most people have forgotten about, but certainly resonated in the minds of the Bay Area fans that came to see them back in the late 60s and early 70s. So Mark Greczmiel is my guest. You can find the California Golden Seals Story, the documentary. It's available on iTunes now for ownership, for purchase, for rental, a bunch of different flavors there, called The California Golden Seal Story. And Mark Greczmiel is my guest. Let's talk to Mark now. Thank you again very much for taking time. And so just 1 minute of background. I have no idea why I'm doing this podcast. All I know is that I kind of do. I have my own sort of childhood memories of sports, mostly from the professional soccer ranks back in the 70s and early 80s.
Okay.
And, it's just been a sort of a fascination as teams in the old North American Soccer League came and went. I became perversely interested in short-lived teams and franchises and why and all that kind of stuff. And I suspect you had childhood memories that kind of led you to create this documentary about the Golden Seals. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, actually, I'm a transplanted Canadian, and my parents moved our family from Vancouver to the Bay Area when I was 7, and so we started going to Seals games 2 years later when I was 9, back in 1967, because there was a new NHL hockey team in the Bay Area. So for the next 9 seasons, as I was growing up and became a teenager, went to a lot of Seals games during those 9 seasons. So they always had a fond place in my heart.
So why the Seals then, etched in your memory versus, say, some of the other more established teams in the Bay Area? Obviously, a plentiful number of those. What sparked your interest in the Seals specifically, or most interestingly?
Well, in the Bay Area, there were a lot of sports teams. That was part of the reason I think the Seals struggled, is that there was, the Giants and the 49ers and the Raiders and the A's and the Warriors and the Oakland Oaks ABA team, and plus college. But I was a big Raiders fan. I was a big Oakland A's fan, but I was also a big hockey fan. So the Seals were they were close by, and you got to see people like Bobby Orr and Bobby Hull and Gordie Howe play, and so it was a good fit.
It was kind of your adjunct, right, to professional hockey, right, given your Canadian roots and probably in your DNA because of those Canadian roots, right, the whole hockey thing. And this was your
brother. Yeah, my brothers and I, before we went to Seals games, we had I think every Canadian kid had a little tabletop hockey set. Usually they had Montreal and Toronto, and you would play with that, and we used to play hours and hours on that, and then they get to see the guys play in real life. That was fantastic.
All right, so we'll get into some of the trials and tribulations of the team in a few minutes, but I kind of want to get into a little bit of the background of the story as to why, as a grown-up professional, ostensibly in the television production industry and business, why the story, why the personal project, why the financial investment in producing a documentary about the team and making one, maybe for posterity. But I'm just curious as to why the extra effort to create the actual movie itself.
Well, I always thought their story was an interesting one, and when I grew up, after I went to film school, and I started a 20-year career in television news, and I actually did do a couple of news stories about the team, about their history, but those were only about 4 minutes long, 4 or 5 minutes long, and later on I became a documentary producer. I was a producer with the E! Entertainment Television on and off for about 10 years, so I did 25 episodes of a show called True Hollywood Story. So I knew how to do long form documentaries, and with the Seals, it was always in the back of my mind, is I want to do this. I'd like to tell their story, but it's much more complicated to do a feature length documentary as opposed to doing a news story. I knew there was going to be a certain amount of expenses involved because there's a licensing fee with the NHL. The places that license footage, they don't give it away for free. But luckily, a lot of places they gave me a greatly reduced rate. I mean, I think they recognized that this was kind of a historical documentary and that I wasn't going to be making a lot of money on it. In fact, my goal is if I can just break even on my cost, I'll be happy. And that's a big question mark. As I mentioned, this was like a labor of love. I really wanted to tell this story, and with the crowdfunding, all the people who stepped forward and donated money to get a download of the film or a DVD I don't know how much money I spent on eBay buying up Seals hats and beanies and programs, and people donated to get those. So that's how a good chunk of the budget was raised.
So when you're setting to do a story like this about a team that doesn't have a whole lot of pieces available or easily discoverable, at what point do you realize that this pursuit that is fun and intriguing, and you maybe learn some things that maybe you didn't know about when you were a kid, becomes so complicated and or potentially financially draining and just a huge time suck from your real world life?
Yeah, it became evident pretty quickly that the time factor was going to be a lot. I mean, I believe I spent more than 1,000 hours on this. I did it over a 2.5 period. It was never a full-time thing. There's sometimes where I'd work a few weeks on it and nothing else, but I do need to pay the bills, so I would have freelance jobs where maybe I would work solid for a few months, and then I would just work on this in the evenings or on the weekends. But it wasn't. I know it's a cliche when people say, "Hey, if you're doing something that you love, it's not a job." I really enjoy doing this. The only frustrating moments were sometimes with like licensing and getting people to call you back, or negotiating with people about footage, or waiting to hear people return your calls. That sometimes wasn't fun. But if you start a project and think that you can get everything lined up beforehand, it's never going to happen. Sometimes you just have to dive in and hope things do start happening, and it did. It's a tremendous amount of satisfaction to take something from point A to point Z, and it's nice to be at point Z right now.
So the movie we're referencing is called The California Golden Seals Story. It's available right now where, Mark?
It's available only on iTunes. So if you look for go to the iTunes website or just Google iTunes and California Golden Seal Story, you can either buy it and download it or rent it. So that's the one place, iTunes.
And now I am a proud owner of the movie myself, and I got to tell you, it was very interesting to watch, and lots of interesting little bits and pieces. But maybe we should start from the start, right?
Okay.
1967 really was sort of the precursor to all of this. How did the seals at the time, not even golden seals, how did they even sort of come into existence? They kind of just magically popped up in this league that only had 6 teams up until that point.
Right. And for 1967, the NHL had decided to expand from 6 teams to 12, and they wanted to have teams west of Chicago. So there was some places that were like kind of a natural selection to get teams, like maybe Seattle, Vancouver, Edmonton or Calgary, and the NHL had signed a TV contract with the CBS television, and CBS wanted to have 2 teams in the biggest markets, and 2 of the biggest markets in the United States, in California, and that was Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area. So that's why places like Vancouver didn't get an NHL team at the time, but Los Angeles and Oakland, San Francisco did. And that's how the Seals came to be.
But it seemed, though, that as a premise for a team, there was a minor league team there, right, which was somewhat successful already, no?
Right. For those people who don't know about how the San Francisco Bay Area is set up, there's the East Bay, and there's also San Francisco. San Francisco they're separated by bridges, and in San Francisco there was the Western Hockey League San Francisco Seals minor league team that played at the old San Francisco Cow Palace, which is it's still there. It was like a World War II era building. It's kind of a barn, but they had a pretty solid fan base there. And when the NHL, when the Seals owners got the franchise, they actually bought the old Western Hockey League Seals team to use it as a foundation for the NHL team. The NHL wanted the Seals to play not in the Cow Palace in San Francisco, but across the bay, across these bridges in the city of Oakland, which had just built a brand new Oakland Coliseum sports complex that had a 50,000 seat football stadium and baseball, and right next door a new arena that held 12,500 fans. So it was at that time it was a state of the art arena, and that's where they wanted them to play. The only problem is there's a psychological thing in the Bay Area that, I grew up in the East Bay in Alameda, and, going over to San Francisco was kind of a big deal. You had to, cross the bridge, get in the car, pay a toll. There's a whole psychological thing about going over to the city, and that worked in reverse. People that from the city didn't want to cross the bridge and go into the East Bay. So a lot of the fans from the San Francisco Seals didn't follow the team across the bay. And the problem was that people in the East Bay really didn't know a lot about hockey. At that time, I believe in the entire, millions and millions of people populated Bay Area, I think there were maybe only 3 hockey rinks, ice skating rinks in for all those people. So there wasn't a huge fan base at that point.
Well, so I mean, obviously, history is 20/20 hindsight, right? But it doesn't sound like fertile ground for a professional sports league that's looking to double its size almost overnight and go national with a national television contract, does it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember there's a famous story about Jack Kent Cooke, who owned he got the L.A. Kings. He also owned the Lakers. When he got the L.A. Kings franchise, he said, hockey is going to be a success because there's 500,000 Canadians living in Los Angeles. And then when the Kings struggled to get people into the stands, he said, now I know why all those Canadians live in Los Angeles. They all hate hockey. So it was kind of the same thing in the Bay Area. It was an uphill struggle. But the team made a lot of mistakes early on. The price of the tickets was higher than people wanted to pay. At the very first game, the season opener against the Philadelphia Flyers, the stadium the arena was only half full. I think it was about 6,000 fans. So that was a problem. And things really got worse right at the beginning because the Seals ownership, the fellow running the franchise was a guy named Barry Van Gerbing, who was a Olympic hockey player, who was, I believe, the godson of Bing Crosby. And he was kind of like a socialite guy, well-connected. He knew a lot of the NHL movers and shakers, which is how he got the job as the front man for the Seals. But the team was basically financed by a lot of people. I think one estimate was that there were over 50 investors who had money in the team. And, you could say that a lot of these people were kind of like rich guys who said, oh, yeah, sure, I'd like to be a part owner of an NHL franchise. And they really didn't know what they were getting into. And so right from the beginning, when the Seals realized that they weren't filling a lot of seats, that was a problem. Another problem was that their coach, Bert Olmsted, who's also their general manager,
Hall of Famer, right? NHL Hall of Famer, right?
Yeah, a great NHL player, but sometimes you can be a great player that doesn't make you a great coach. And he alienated a lot of the players. There's some famous incidents where he had the team on a Thanksgiving Day practice. He was disgusted with how the team was playing, and he made the players sit all afternoon in the locker room to contemplate their lot in life. And then one of the early practices, he had the team come out, and there's a drill in hockey called stops and starts, where all the guys, they line up on one side of the rink, and you go sideways, or you can go forward too, and you just rush as fast as you can to the other side, and you dead stop right before the boards, and then you go back, and you just go back and forth, and it's really, really tough on your legs. And some of the players say, you do it maybe 4 or 5 times maximum, and you're exhausted. And he had them do it for a couple of hours, and guys were throwing up, and they weren't very happy about it. So there was a lot of animosity with the coach. So the team had low morale. They didn't have a lot of people in the stands, and so almost immediately they started talking about moving the team to Vancouver or to Buffalo or to Seattle. And when those rumors hit, when people are thinking, well, I just bought season tickets, why should I go to a team that's going to be moving anyway? So that really affected the ticket sales, especially that first season.
Well, it looks like even in that first season there were some other some self-inflicted wounds, but also a few other sort of things of fate. I mean, the one thing that struck me in that very first season was they actually changed the name of the team a couple of games into the season, right? It was actually. So what was that all about?
Well, originally they were called the California Seals, and it's kind of like remember the Anaheim the Angels, they were called the California Angels instead of the Anaheim Angels, which
Sure.
And so it was, and they decided to change it a few months into Oakland Seals to maybe create some more identity in the city of Oakland, so that people would kind of rally towards the team. That was more of a cosmetic thing. So the first season didn't really go that well. The second season was a big turnaround, actually. And what happened then, even though the team was still struggling with ticket sales, there's a gentleman named Frank Selke who was working in the front office, and there's a trophy named after him. He took over as the general manager. He hired a guy named Bill Torrey. For those of you who don't know a lot about hockey history, Bill Torrey would later build the dynasty with the New York Islanders, winning 4 straight Stanley Cups. So you have Frank Selke and Bill Torrey running the hockey operation, while the team's ownership was in disarray. They were selling the team. The new buyers were defaulting. Would go back to the original owners. They were trying to get rid of the team, but the hockey operation was actually doing quite well. And in seasons 2 and 3, the Seals, they went from last place their first season to second place in their division the second season, and they were in the playoffs seasons 2 and 3. So they were actually improving a lot on the ice. They were making some really good decisions with the people that they were drafting. So they were really building up. And then what happened after season 3 is when a gentleman named Charles O. Finley bought the team, and that created the horrific horror that's known as the Seals' middle years.
Well, okay. So, I mean, you brought it up. There are a couple of other questions I wanted to even get to even before we got to that. But Charlie Finley, right, clearly is a polarizing figure and a notable one in professional sports writ large, right? Obviously, Oakland A's and the whole story behind that, and some of the other dalliances that Charlie sort of brought to professional sports. But you're talking about basically already, even before Charlie, steps in, middle of the summer of 1970, right? You're talking about a team that's already effectively been owned by one entity, was attempting to sell itself, or actually was sold, and then reverted back to the original owner. So you really had the team kind of already change hand 3 times before, I guess, Charlie steps in kind of middle of 1970 to, I guess, quote unquote, save the day. But he wasn't the only one interested in the team, right? At that point. Right.
Charlie Finley. Now, just for those of you who don't know out there who don't know who Charlie Finley is, he was a very flamboyant, publicity-loving guy. He made his money selling insurance to doctors, and he was very wealthy. He had bought the Oakland A's baseball team and wound up winning 3 World Series in a row. And he did it on a very, very small budget. This was before free agency. He loved to publicize himself. He loved to be in front of the cameras. So when the Seals, he stepped forward and said, "I want to buy the Seals," and unfortunately, he'd also bragged how he had only seen one hockey game ever before he bought the team. So
well,
there's a lot of.
I'm sorry, Mark. What was the quote that's I think a really perfect one in the movie? You've got the footage of him at the press conference. You remember what he said?
Right. When after he bought the team, he announced to the press, "I want you to know I don't know the first thing about hockey," which and then it cuts to Frank Selke and Bill Torrey sitting on the stage, and the look of horror on their faces because they could see what was coming down the railroad tracks. That was a big. People wonder why he ever wanted to buy an NHL team, but at the time, you mentioned that he wasn't the only person, and you're exactly right. There was a gentleman named Jerry Seltzer. Jerry Seltzer, his family created roller derby, which back in the 60s and 70s was actually a pretty popular sport. Jerry Seltzer was a very, very smart guy. He was a master promoter. He took roller derby. He put together all these independent TV stations across North America, and they were running roller derby in places like Madison Square Garden, in Toronto, and arenas all across North America, and making it a success. So he got together with the owners of 3 American Football League teams, because it was the AFL and the NFL at that time, and they got together, they got the money, and he made a play to buy the Seals. And he was a very smart man. They created a 100-plus page document with an entire marketing plan, how they were going to market the Seals, how they were going to sell hockey in the Bay Area, what they were going to do with players, how they were going to draft. Charles Finley, his entire proposal was a 1-page memo. So those were the 2 people that the NHL approved that they would consider that could buy the team. Both men go to New York to meet with the NHL board. They sit in a conference room, and Charles Finley lobbied extensively, telling the owners, hey, I'm just like you. I'm going to run this thing. I'm just like you guys. I came up from the street. Blah blah blah. And rather than give it to Jerry Seltzer, they give it to Charles Finley. And as one of the interviews said, they regretted it ever since. And I managed to sit down with Jerry Seltzer, and he opened up about the whole story, and that was wonderful. Like what hockey might have been at that time if they had let him buy the team.
Well, in other words, my sense is that Finley was looked upon as more of a quote unquote sports establishment guy, right? Obviously, with his baseball holdings and his success there, right? That there's maybe more of a comfort level with the NHL Board of Governors versus somebody who was a little bit more, show, perhaps, which is ironic.
That's the funny thing is that Jerry Seltzer said, even though the Oakland Coliseum arena, or the complex, the sports complex, even though Finley was a tenant with the A's, they endorsed Jerry Seltzer to buy the team because they dealt with Finley on a day-to-day basis and knew what a nightmare he was to deal with. He was extremely thrifty in that he didn't want to hire many people. People who worked for the Seals, for the A's, also had to do double duty working for the Seals as well. So it was a very tiny operation. He didn't like to spend a lot of money, but it says something when the sports complex where your baseball team is situated as doesn't want that guy to be the owner of a new hockey franchise and actually endorses somebody else.
Another legendary story, and again, this is exactly why the story of this team is just it's fascinating. I can imagine why. I'm sure you the story just tells itself. Unfortunately, it costs money to tell that story, which you've done. But all right, so let's get into Finley, right? So probably nobody in the history of the team probably was more, I guess, notable because he brought in a whole bunch of changes. One of which was to change the name of the team to California Seals, right, from Oakland, which
California Golden Seals. Yeah.
Okay, which I guess according to my notes here, that actually occurred a couple of games into the season as well, or did that start at the beginning of the season?
I don't remember the exact timing. I know they were struggling with the name. They were talking about calling it. They didn't want the words Oakland in the title. Mm-hmm. They were talking about calling it the Bay Area Seals. They actually made some pennants with that, but they settled on California Golden Seals. The Golden Finley's A's, they wore Kelly green and gold uniforms, and so he changed the uniforms for the Seals to Kelly green and gold as well. They were a little loud. A lot of people liked them. I liked them. Some people didn't, but that was his prerogative to get new uniforms. He also, the first season he skated, he painted the skates green and gold, which was a little bit of a change for a lot of players. I don't want to jump ahead too far in the story, but the following season, he actually introduced white ice skates. They were called polar bear white ice skates because the Oakland A's wore white baseball shoes. So he wanted the the Seals to wear white ice skates, and we can talk about more about that now or later.
No, I think it's important to bring up the white skates because it seems to me, and for those who have seen the documentary or will, again, for those who have not remembered, we're talking about the film called The California Golden Seal Story. It seems to be one of the things, if not the thing, that people, if anything, remember about the team are the white skates.
Right. That's all the players I interviewed said when they hear that they played for the Seals, the first thing they bring up are the white skates. And if you're a Canadian hockey player, when you grew up, the only people who wore white ice skates were female figure skaters. So there was a lot of ridicule about they received from fans and from the other players about wearing white ice skates. And the white skates caused some problems because back in that day there was still a lot of black and white televisions. So you're wearing white ice skates on the white ice. A lot of times it looked like the players were skating on stumps. Finley was fanatical that the skates be spotless, like white. But during the course of a game, they get marked up. They get marked up by the pucks, by collisions, by going into the boards.
Sure. So
they would get black marks on them. So Finley insisted that the trainers, after every game, get a paintbrush and retouch the skates. So they had to be hand painted again. And during the course of the season, and I thought the players were joking when they told me this, but they were serious. There was so much paint on the skates that they would get heavier and heavier, and would actually cost them, to lose a couple of steps, when they're going for the puck because there was so much weight that they were carrying around with those skates.
Well, it seemed to me that Finley had a lot of fascination with color in general, right? Because there's a little bit in the doc you talk about there's these orange pucks. Did that ever actually happen, or was that just more of an experiment?
Right. He wanted to do that with baseball, too. He wanted to, I think, introduce an orange or yellow baseball, which was rejected. I think they tried it out. I think I saw one of them on eBay not too long ago. And then with the orange pucks, he wanted to introduce that, and that did not go over well. I don't know if that was necessarily a bad idea. I mean, it might have been interesting to try it out, but at that time, the NHL was very conservative. And one of the things that he did do, I mean, he threw a lot of ideas out. Some of them were pretty bad, but some of them were interesting. Is he was the first? They were the first NHL team to put their names on the back of their jerseys, like during the regular season. I think one team had tried that as a preseason thing, but that was the first time the players' names were on their jerseys. And there was a lot of pushback on that because some NHL cities said, "Well, hey, wait a minute." If people come to the games and they can see the names on the jerseys, why are they going to buy a program? That'll cost me program sales. So some cities, I believe Toronto and Detroit, insisted that the Seals travel with a second pair of uniforms, road uniforms, without the names on the back because they were worried that would cut into their program sales.
It's comical, just comical.
Yes, yeah. But Finley, he was a master promoter, and he had all these ideas about selling the team, and he always wanted to be front and center on these things. He did a thing where he thought, well, how do I promote hockey? He said, where do people talk about sports? And he wanted to do, he thought barbershops. People talk about sports in barbershops. So he got the brilliant idea of inviting barbers from all over the San Francisco Bay Area to come to this high-priced restaurant in Oakland, and he was going to have a big party for them, an open bar, and the idea was, after the party, they were going to show some films about the Seals, and then he was going to get give them free tickets, and then get the barbers to talk about hockey with their customers, and that would drive thousands of people to Seals games. Unfortunately, at that event, they had an open bar, and so by the time they did the presentation, most of the barbers were already plastered. So the promotion didn't go all that well.
So okay, so why? So with a guy like Finley, right, he's such a master showman and promoter, and maybe even self-promoter, right?
Yeah.
It seems like the stories that you're telling here, he lavished money on promotions like that and open bars, yet he was so parsimonious with the salaries for his players.
Yes, yeah, that's the thing. Was all the players said it was, in some ways he was so generous. He was the first. They were the first NHL team to fly first class. Back in that day, I mean, now they all fly on private jet charters, and they don't travel with the public. It's they got to have the first class big seats, and but back then they used to SEALs, all the sports teams, the NBA, I believe most Major League Baseball, they would just travel with the public on a regular commercial flight. So Finley said, "No, look, you guys, if you're going to go on these long flights to the East Coast, you're gonna fly first class." And the guys talked about, at that time the Boeing 747 was a brand new airplane, and the team got to the airport. They had never been on a 747 before. One of the guys, they go on the plane. He goes up the steps to the upper deck, which is where the first class lounge was. And as a joke, he goes in the bathroom, strips to his shorts, splashes water all over himself, comes down the steps and announces to the rest of his teammates, "Hey guys, come on upstairs. The pool's great." So that was kind of like a change of pace to travel first class for them. So Finley would do that. He would, every once in a while they would have an upset, and he would take the team out to Gucci's in New York, and he would treat all the players to a new suit. He would give them $300 bonuses if they played a really good game. So in that way he was generous. Where he wasn't generous was when the new World Hockey Association started up, and they were looking to pluck players from the NHL. Mm-hmm. Finley refused to up the salaries for his players, and the SEALs wound up losing 9 players to the WHA, more than any other team, and that kind of sealed their fate during that era as a sports franchise.
But one person that comes up in the documentary as almost a bastion of stability on the player side, who did not leave in that exodus, is their goalie Gilles Milosh. No. Yes,
yeah. Gilles Milosh was. I interviewed Wayne Gretzky for this film, and Wayne Gretzky said that he thought for a 2 or 3 year period that Gilles Milosh was probably the best player in the NHL, which kind of surprised me that with all the people to choose from, that he recognized how important the SEALs goalie was. The SEALs, when Gilles Milosh started, and I remember this happening. They got him in a trade. He wasn't even the goalie they wanted. They had traded with Chicago to get a goalie. That goalie had some health problems or had an injury, so they sent him back, and they sent 21-year-old Gilles Milosh to the SEALs. He'd only played in a few NHL games, so the SEALs, they're going to Boston. They're playing against the Boston Bruins, probably the strongest team in the NHL that year. Just a fearsome opponent, and they go to Boston, and they tell 21-year-old Gilles Milosh, who expected when he was traded to go to the minor leagues, because at that time there weren't any goalies that young playing in the NHL. They tell him he's going to start against the Boston Bruins, and he's terrified. He figures he's going to get bombarded, and his career's going to be over. The other SEALs players were saying that their aim that night was just to maybe to put the other Boston to sleep and try not to get beat too badly, and then just sneak out of there after they lose. So the game starts, and Gilles Milosh has probably the game of his life. They're dramatically outshot. And they wind up shutting out the Boston Bruins 2-0. And that season, Boston was only shut out twice, and the other time was at the end of the season in a 0 game after they were waiting for the playoffs. But that was a shocker. And I remember in the Bay Area media, the reports. I remember the next day, the SEALs not only beat Boston, they beat Boston 2-0. It was such a dramatic victory, and we go into a bit of depth about that in the documentary. With Joe Milosh as their goalie, the team felt like they finally had all the right moving parts. But unfortunately, a lot of things happened. We mentioned Bill Torrey and Frank Selke, who had masterminded the rebuilding of the Seals. When Finley took over the team, he forced both of them out, so they departed. And so you have a guy who brags about having only seen one hockey game before he bought the team, now making all these major hockey decisions, which was not a good recipe.
Well, it seems in the movie, any of these sort of victories, any of the victories that do happen with the team, almost feel like they're Pyrrhic victories, right? Where they're sort of it's David versus Goliath kind of things, where those wins are celebrated, but unfortunately don't come often enough. I thought there was a really great little aside about. Almost, I guess, a microcosm of the team in my mind is a guy named Morris Mott. Do you want to talk about that little story about sort of how he sort of was adopted, I guess, by some of the other NHLers out there?
Right. The Seals, after the WHA rated the team, Finley was spending less and less time trying to build up the franchise. So the Seals were they were in last place. Finley, I believe, owned the team for 4 seasons. Their last season that Finley owned the team, the Seals did not even have, not only did they not have a TV contract, very few of the games were ever televised in the Bay Area, they did not even have a radio contract. So you couldn't even listen to the Seals games on the radio. It was that bad. And the Seals were the laughingstock of the NHL. And it got to the point where players, fans in some of the other cities actually started to feel sorry for the Seals. And one city was New York, and they saw that the Seals had a journeyman player named Morris Mott on the team, and he was a journeyman player. He wasn't a star, didn't get a lot of goals, but they decided they really liked that name. It was a unique name, Morris Mott. And so the Rangers fans formed the Morris Mott Fan Club, and they put up banners at the game, Morris Mott Fan Club. They toasted him with Mott's or apple juice. They actually met with him after the game. So whenever the Seals would come to Madison Square Garden, there would be all these banners for the Morris Mott Fan Club. And one of the players tells the story that one time they were driving up in the team bus to Madison Square Garden, and on the front of the big giant light up sign, and then in small letters it says the New York Rangers welcome, and in giant letters Morris Mott, and in little letters below it, and the California Golden Seals. And so the players all laughed when they saw that.
That sounds like a Spinal Tap moment, right? A puppet show and Spinal Tap.
Right.
Well, it wasn't. So before we get off into the transition from Finley, there were a couple other things I wanted to highlight. I thought there were just. It seems like the fans at home, though, those that did show, still had some fun, though, right? You want to talk about the streaker and maybe even Crazy George?
Right. Yeah. The thing I remember, there were some games when there would be 2,500 fans in the arena, and then other times, the Seals would sometimes sell out if like the Rangers or Boston would come into town, but sellouts were not that often, so the place would be like maybe half full or a third full. But the Seals fans were really loud, and I didn't realize how loud they were until I started my TV career. I was working up in Edmonton, and this was during the Gretzky era, and at the Northlands Coliseum would be 16,000 fans, and it would be really quiet. And I thought, it was much louder at the Coliseum with the Seals than it was in Edmonton. I think it's gotten louder there now, but that really hit me. So the Seals had a booster club that was very, very loyal to the players. So the fans were pretty, they really stuck with them. So one of the things the Seals, with Finley, they not spending much money on the team. The marketing people really had to come up with ways to promote it. One year, their entire advertising budget was $5,000 for the whole season. So they had to do everything with that, and they could afford.
And in today's dollars, that's what, 15,000, right? I mean, it's just nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's I can't even imagine. I mean, they do promotions on one night that cost much more than that, but they could afford one billboard by a freeway, so they had to think outside the box. And one of the things in the early '70s, there was a lot of streaking going along, where like college students, where people would strip and then run naked across the campus, and
sure,
it was a big deal at that time. So what they did is they paid the girlfriend of the stick boy to come to a game, and I was actually at that game, and she came underneath the stands, and she came out with just the skates on. And they had told the photographers there, "Oh, you might want to stand over on that side. Something might happen. When the players come back on the ice." And so she skated across the ice, and the place just went crazy, and screaming and yelling. And not only do we have a photo of that event, but someone sent me some Super 8 film that they shot of her skating across the ice, and that's in the movie.
Worth the price of admission, right there, friends.
Right? Yeah. And they got and the coverage they got for that stunt was tremendous. So those are the types of things they had to do to promote the team.
You also spent a couple of minutes with as well in there with a high school teacher who just became sort of the ultimate sort of super fan, and it's actually somebody I want to get on a future show. Is Crazy George Henderson?
Yes, Crazy George was a high school teacher in the Bay Area. One day, one of his school's sporting teams decides to go to a Seals game, and they invite him along. So he would at his school, he would bring this drum and pound the drum. So he brought that along, and he started pounding the drum, and he started directing the people around him to cheer, and the fans loved it. And so after the game, one of the Seals guys came up to him and said, "Look, whenever you want to come to a game, we'll give you a free ticket." And so he came to a few more, and then they actually hired him. I believe they paid him $50 per game to come. And it was such a crowd pleaser. And I remember, he'd always come in, sometime during the first period, there'd be a break in the play, and he would run up at ice level with his drum and pound, 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 and everybody would just go nuts. And he would run through the stands like a wild man, directing cheers on this side and that side. He claims he's the guy who invented the wave, although that's disputed. So he became a really popular member of the Seals organization, and he actually became so popular that other teams, sporting teams, started hiring him, and he quit his job as a teacher, and he had actually a very nice career as a professional sports leader. I interviewed him for the documentary, and he's, I believe, 71 or 72 now, and he's still doing the cheerleading, although he said not as much as he used to.
Yeah.
But he was incredibly popular. And in fact, he became a tool for the Seals because what he would do is he would sneak down to right behind the glass. So if there was a face-off about to happen, he would get behind the opposing player, and right before the face-off, just pound the drum, and the guys would just jump up in the air because they hadn't experienced anything like that. There was one game where they were playing against Boston, and Terry O'Reilly of the Bruins, their enforcer, was in the penalty box, and George snuck down behind him and pounded the drum. And the guy first he threw his gloves at him, then he threw his stick at him, and then Terry O'Reilly he climbed out of the penalty box and chased Crazy George up the stands with in his skates. So that was another dramatic moment there.
I got to get George on. Hopefully, I have not reached out yet, but I'd love to. I think I became aware of him from my fandom of the New York Cosmos NASL team and his the away games against the San Jose Earthquakes, and I think that's where I
think that's one of his. I believe that's one of his contracts still was with the Earthquakes. So.
Well, so from those sort of happy and fun-filled times, I think we kind of maybe segue now into sort of the denouement of the team. It looks like Finn, from your description and from how you depict it in the movie, it almost feels like Finley kind of just lost interest and/or was kind of sort of going through the motions. And so you want to let's circle around 74, 75 when the team basically gets sold yet again.
Right. Yeah, it was in early '74, I believe it was. It was halfway through the '73-'74 season. Finley had cut the ticket prices in half. It was no interest in the team, or very little interest. And, it was almost like he was thumbing his nose at the NHL because it was becoming an embarrassment to the league that this team was not getting, that it was not being supported by its owner.
I thought, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought actually, I've done some research on Finley. I always thought, I'm not sure where I read this, that Finley was actually living in Chicago and his brother was running the team maybe, but locally?
He was based out of, I believe, his company was in Chicago. I believe his home was in Indiana.
Sure.
And then he had a residence in the Bay Area because that's one of the things he had told the NHL that he wanted. He would reside in the Bay Area, but he was not in the Bay Area that often. I remember distinctly seeing him at one game where he sat in the stands with someone else wearing his green blazer and fans coming up to him and talking to him. But he was, and a lot of the players mentioned how they almost never saw him. Reggie Leach, who later became a superstar with the Philadelphia Flyers, he was with the Seals, and he talked about he only saw him once during his time with the club. He had I can't remember right now if it was his cousin or, but there was another relative that had to do a lot of Charlie's, I wouldn't say dirty work, but he was part of the small group of people that Finley had around him to help with baseball and hockey. But when the NHL bought the team back from Finley being the master businessman he was, actually got enough money to pay back, to cover all his losses, that he actually made money by selling the team back to the NHL. And one of the quotes, John Porter, who was a beat writer for the team for the Oakland Tribune, talked to him, and Finley told him off the record, he goes, "Yeah, I really screwed them, didn't I?" So that was kind of the attitude that Finley had toward the NHL.
So if the league now was owning and running the team, the white skates went away, right? What else changed?
They went to black skates right away for the rest of the season, and they finally, the Seals had a coach, a guy named Fred Glover, for a good chunk of that time, who was not really, you wouldn't call him a modern era coach. He was a great player in the American Hockey League. He didn't really spend much time in the NHL. He was kind of a frustrated guy because he wanted to be in the NHL, and as a coach, he was not that effective because the Seals practices, and the players complained about this, were basically just scrimmages. They didn't practice a lot of drills. And the players kind of resented that, because they would go to the Montreal Forum and see the Canadians practice, and they wanted to try more drills. They wanted to buy video equipment to make the team better. And the coach said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that. You guys see yourself on videotape, and you won't believe it's you doing that stuff." So he wasn't really forward thinking. The practices, Fred Glover would actually suit up and play with the team at the scrimmages, and the players realized that the scrimmages would not end until he managed to score a goal. So the players would tell the goalies in the practice, "Let him score so we can go home." So that's how it went. So when the NHL bought the team, Fred Glover resigned, and they got a guy named Marshall Johnson, who was a popular player with the Seals. and he was college educated, and he later actually became the GM with the Ottawa Senators, and he was a really smart guy. He understood how to deal with players, and he understood they had to practice things. So they did a whole reboot of the franchise for 74-75.
New uniforms too, right?
New uniforms, Pacific blue and white uniforms. They looked a lot like the UCLA football uniforms at that time. They're kind of cool. There's a lot of maybe kind of a turquoise teal type of. The pants were a little. The road versions looked a little powder blue. And some of the players say, "Oh yeah, they're kind of nice, maybe a little girlish." But as one of their goalies, Gary the Cobra Simmons, mentioned, they said, "Look, we're hockey players. It's not a fashion show. We're trying to win. We're trying to win hockey games."
There are a lot of uniform fetishists out there, and there's a whole thing who actually look at that new 74-75 set of colors and uniforms as actually being quite memorable and actually well done, almost to the point of being a bit color-wise ahead of its time.
They were kind of cool uniforms. I mean, you look at the color pictures now, and these actually stand up, and they could be in the NHL right now with those uniforms. So, I thought I have a replica in my closet right now.
I would imagine you'd have more than a few replicas and other things from the team, right?
I have more than a few. I have the uniforms. I got seals, pennants. I got a whole bunch of stuff. But for that new season, so the NHL actually owned the team at that point, and
never a good thing, right?
Oh, pardon?
Never a good thing to have the league come in and own the team.
Yeah, because it's kind of a double-edged sword, because the other owners are owning the team, and how much money do they want to spend on the team? But their management at that point got better. And they did trade a lot of their good players away that had higher salaries, but then they started to rebuild, and they kind of bet the bank on the Seals had traded away so many first-round draft choices that they hadn't had a first-round draft choice for years. So that season, they finally got their first-round draft choice, and they had the third overall pick, and they drafted a guy named Rick Hampton. They had just changed the rules in the NHL. Rick was only 17 years old when he was drafted. He was a defenseman out of Ontario, and he was a really, really good player. But he was really young. By the time they started playing, he was only 18. And this is at a time when the salaries are starting to climb. His agent was Alan Eagleson, who was notorious for he helped raise the salaries, but he also got into a lot of trouble for let's say embezzling the money that was supposed to go to some of the players. But so Rick signed a 3-year contract for $600,000, and that made a lot of the Seals players jealous, because they were making a lot less. They were making $50,000-$60,000 a year, and now you got this 18-year-old kid making 3-4 times as much as they are. And then to compound that, the first thing he did was he bought a Mercedes-Benz, which didn't go over very well with the players. And but the big problem was, usually when you get someone like that, you want to bring the guy up slowly, maybe have him in the minors for a little bit, get him acclimated. And they threw him into the media spotlight. They started calling him the next Bobby Orr, so that he had a lot of pressure on him right from the start. And I interviewed Rick up in Ontario, and he was incredibly forthcoming about what happened and the pressure he was under, and he was one of the best interviews in the documentary.
Well, why don't we segue now to the last, I guess, season, the demise, right? It seemed that the league had a new potential owner, or I guess did purchase, correct? On some hopes of doing some other things and maybe making a final sort of good, solid go at it. You want to kind of sort of take us into that?
Yeah, the second to last season, they were improving, and then the new GM, a guy named Bill McCreary, he and Marshall Johnson, the new coach, did not. There was some friction between them. Marshall Johnson felt that Bill McCreary always wanted to. He came aboard after Marshall was named coach. Mm-hmm. He always felt that Bill wanted to coach it himself. They fired Marshall halfway through the season, and the team skidded the last half of the season. But then Bill McCreary, was no longer the coach for their final season. For that year, 75-76, a gentleman named Mel Swiggs steps forward. Mel Swiggs was one of the owners of the original Western Hockey League Seals. He was a very well-respected businessman in San Francisco. He owned a hotel chain. He was very, very well connected politically. He bought the team, and that was a very popular move with the players. But he realized that the team to survive in Oakland could not stay at the 12,500-seat Oakland Coliseum. They needed to be in San Francisco. And so they made a deal with the mayor and with the politicians in San Francisco to build a brand new, I believe it was an 18,000-seat arena in the heart of San Francisco. That was going to be a done deal. And so they were all excited about that. They're going to have a lot more fans. It's right in the city. They have, public transit going right to the arena. So they thought this was all great. So that last season, the Seals they draft a new player, a guy named Dennis Marook, who I believe was only like 5'8", 5'7", 5'8".
They called him Pee-wee.
Pee-wee. That was his nickname. And I remember he just electrified the team. A little guy that people thought was too small to play in the NHL, and he became. I think he scored. I say a little over 30 goals that season. He was so exciting to watch, and whenever he came on the ice, people started yelling "Marook, Marook," and it was just an electrifying guy to watch. And that season, the Seals were really improving. They didn't make the playoffs. They came very close to making the playoffs, but they had won more games than they had in years. Their attendance had climbed to the highest levels in years at the Oakland Coliseum, and it was just a very, very positive feeling around the team. And unfortunately, after the season ended, the deal, a new mayor had come in, and the deal to build a new arena in San Francisco was killed. And with that, they realized, there's no way we're going to make our money back now. We can't stay in Oakland. And so the Gunn brothers, who were connected in Cleveland, they had an arena in there. They were the minority owners of the team. They convinced George Gunn to move the team to Cleveland.
The Richfield Coliseum, 30 miles, outside of downtown Cleveland, right? Almost a white elephant in many people's eyes.
Yeah, I believe it was between Akron and Cleveland, and it was like a halfway point, I believe. It was the way it was explained to me. The arena was later torn down because, you're right, it was a white elephant. So basically, the players had to pack up and leave, relocate everyone to Cleveland, those who wanted to go. Like a lot of the front office staff didn't go. And, the hockey cards that year, they didn't even have time to redo the hockey cards. The players were wearing their Seals uniforms in a lot of the Seals colors. And so, I think they announced it in July. It might have been June or July when they announced they were moving. And then, they started playing preseason. It was in September. So it was not they had a huge arena, but we talk a lot about the Cleveland era in the film, and the players said sometimes it felt like they were playing just in front of the ushers, and you'd see like thousands of empty seats in some of those games. It was pretty sad, and they limped along for 2 seasons, and then Mel Swiggs sold his ownership to the Gunn brothers after 1 year. And then after 2 seasons, it got so bad they couldn't even afford to pay the players at some points, and the players had to vote once before a game whether they were going to play that night or not. And then the team was absorbed into the Minnesota North Stars, and then North Stars later moved to Dallas.
So at some point we're gonna do something on Cleveland in the NHL on another episode, because that too is a fascinating story. But maybe we should. I'd like to and first of all, I want to say thank you for all your time thus far. Maybe we can end sort of though on a happier note, right? And I think you did a very good job both at the beginning of the film and at the end. I guess, frankly, setting up the irony of what is now a very successful franchise in the Bay Area, and maybe you can tell us sort of how that came about, and maybe perhaps a certain famous hockey player by the name of Wayne Gretzky and his role in maybe helping spark that yet again.
Right. Well, the Gunn brothers, they own the Minnesota North Stars, and they made a deal because the team there was a move the team to Dallas, so they made a deal where they sold the team, the North Stars, and they got the rights to the new NHL franchise, which was San Jose. So that helped create the San Jose Sharks. The interesting thing about the Sharks, hockey in California was getting popular because when Gretzky was traded to Los Angeles, what that did for ticket sales with the LA Kings was tremendous. There was so much excitement about hockey in the Bay Area, so that really created a groundswell of support for hockey in California, which created the Ducks, which created the San Jose Sharks. So I was working in television in Sacramento at that time, and we did some stories about the startup of the Sharks, and they had a lot of very smart people working for them. The research they did on marketing, they knew exactly where their fans were, where to do outreach, how they were going to promote the team. So they did a wonderful job. And not to mention, they were in San Jose. They built a brand new arena. They played at the old Cow Palace for 2 years, but they built a brand new arena in San Jose, heart of the Silicon Valley, where you have all that internet money. So that was a good thing.
And interesting that they would choose to play at the Cow Palace for 2 years while their arena was being built, and not the Oakland Coliseum arena.
Right. Yeah. That was. I don't remember for sure because I know the Oakland Coliseum was remodeled because they realized, because the Warriors play there,
sure, that
it was too small, and they left the walls up, but they basically gutted the inside. And made it deeper. And I think now it holds about 18,000 fans. I'm not sure exactly. I don't know if that was happening during that time, but it might have been. But yeah, I'm not sure why the Cow Palace and why not the Oakland Coliseum.
Well, it's also interesting too that the whole idea of getting an arena in closer to San Francisco proper really hasn't happened. Right? We're still looking at the Cow Palace as a place for certain events, and then as you mentioned, now what is now the Oracle Arena is, I think it's the Oracle Arena, is still there, albeit rehabbed, but there is really no quote unquote from scratch modern facility in the San Francisco area proper.
Right. I know the Warriors have been trying to get a new arena built. I don't know what the status of that deal is, but that's been an ongoing thing. To do that, because with the Giants baseball, they built an arena downtown, which has been a huge success. So it would be nice to have an arena in downtown. But you mentioned San Jose and hockey. The Sharks kind of distanced themselves from the Seals when the team started because the Seals were kind of a laughingstock. They were a failed franchise, but just a few weeks ago, on January 7th, I believe it was, or 8th, the Sharks, to celebrate their 25th anniversary and the 50th anniversary of the NHL, they did a Seals tribute night that
That's
I
great.
went to. And it was too late to include that in my film because the film was already done, but I did go with my video camera. I shot a 6-minute video that's on YouTube. But the Sharks did a wonderful job. They invited Joe Milosh, Dennis Maruk, Gary the Cobra Simmons, Norm Ferguson, Ernie Hickey. There was somebody else too, Burt Marshall, and they did a wonderful tribute night. Everybody who came got a Seals T-shirt.
That's great.
And the players, I don't know if they knew what to expect. I think part of them were wondering, will anyone really care? And the Sharks set up an autograph table, a long table where all the Seals players could sit as people came in, and they had old Seals jerseys and memorabilia and sticks and programs. And when people came in, they were rushing over to the Seals players. I have never seen so many Seals jerseys in one place before. And they were like 5 deep asking for autographs. People brought sticks saying, "You signed the stick back in 1973 for me. I've always kept it." And the players were just genuinely, I think, awestruck at the level of love that was shown to them. And then before the game, the players, and I was actually right behind them with my camera as they went through the Sharks dressing room. They went to the to past the Sharks bench, and they went on the ice. They had a red carpet. They introduced the team, and I was standing right next to the bench. And as the Seals players were being introduced, the Sharks players were all pounding their sticks into the boards in a tribute to their NHL predecessors. So it was a very emotional night.
That's great, and frankly, that's one of the main reasons why I'm venturing into this podcast, because and you can pick a team, you can pick a league, you can pick. There's always there are people's memories of teams, and whether they're important parts of their lives or when they're growing up as children, and there's an impact there, and you hate to see sort of that history kind of just fade away, or worse, be just kind of ignored or just unknown. In your mind, though, and I know there are professional historians out there that care about this kind of stuff, and I guess I kind of do too, and I suspect you as well. Is the history of the Seals franchise, is that effectively found a home? Is it nestled in within the San Jose Sharks, or could the Dallas Stars lay claim to that? Does the league have any care about where sort of the official stats and history and lineage of the Seals might live on, or does it not matter at this point?
That's funny you should mention that, because one of the people who helped support the documentary is with the Dallas Stars organization, and we talked about that, and he said that the Seals DNA is in the Dallas Stars, but then you could also argue that because the Gunn brothers were the owners of the Seals, part owners, the Barons that came the North Stars, and then brought the team, got the new franchise that they have a say in that as well. So yeah, I think there is a connection, because I don't think hockey would have come back if it hadn't been for the Seals. The Seals did create during their time there. There were a lot more hockey rinks were built, so there was certainly a lot more awareness of the NHL because of the Seals. The Sharks have upped the ante so dramatically, though. But there's a lot of things. It's Gretzky coming to California. It's the Seals being in the NHL. It's the brilliance of the Sharks marketing people. So, there's enough credit to go around.
Well, hopefully a little of that credit will go to you with this documentary. I'm going to just ask one last question then. And by the way, again, we're talking about the film, that's dedicated to the history of the California Golden Seals, called, oddly enough, The California Golden Seals Story. And Mark Greczmiel's been very kind to spend quite a bit of time with us on this. But maybe we could wrap up with we talked on the phone earlier about your, or via email, on the story about how you got Gretzky to participate in the film. You want to sort of wax us with that little story?
Yes. He was one of my Hail Mary interviews. I really wanted to get him because I had read that the first NHL game he ever saw in person was the Seals game. And so I When I worked in Edmonton, I saw Gretzky a lot, like at airports or events, and of course playing, but I'd never really met him. I had spoken to his former agent once on the phone, so I emailed his agent and told him who I was, that I was in Edmonton, and what I wanted to do. And he said, "Well, I don't represent Wayne anymore, but this is who does. Here's his email. Send him a message and mention that you spoke with me." And I did. I sent off an email, and they said, "Okay, we'll pass this along to Wayne, and we'll get back to you." And so a week later, I get an email, and I remember when I got it, I thought, "Oh yeah, they're going to say, oh, I'm sorry, Wayne is too busy right now." And they said, Wayne would like to do this. When do you want to do it?" Oh, and so he lives, here in outside of Los Angeles, and so he wants to do it at a hotel, and not far from where he lives, and they said, he's on a very, very tight schedule. You can have him for 8 minutes, but he has to leave, so you have to be ready and everything. It's okay, great. So he set up, and we're waiting for him at the lobby, and his assistant shows up, and it's and we're waiting, and she goes, "Oh," I said, "have you seen Wayne yet?" I go, "No." I said, "Oh, well, he's supposed to be here, and but now it's the time when we're supposed to be starting to do the interview, and now I can just see my time ticking away." And so we're walking around the hotel trying to find Wayne Gretzky, and then we finally find him, and and he could not have been nicer. And he told a story about like he knew the Seals' history. He told a story about how his grandmother took him to a game at Maple Leaf Gardens when he was 5, and it was against the Seals. The Seals goalie was a guy named Gary Smith, and Gary Smith was famous for skating up the ice with the puck and trying to score a goal as a goalie. And Wayne saw that. Then years later, when he got into professional hockey with the Indianapolis Racers of the WHA, his roommate was none other than Gary Smith, and they had talked about that first game. So he told that story. He talked about the white skates. He talked about the Seals' legacy. He could not have been nicer. And then he stayed longer than the 8 minutes that we were allotted. And then I had a neighbor helping me with the shoot, and so I was hoping that maybe we could get a picture of the three of us after the interview. And so Wayne said, "No." So, "Well, we'll take a picture with each of you, so you can both have a picture." "Oh, great!" And then I had brought a Seals jersey along as a backdrop, and I thought, well, it'd be nice maybe to have the Seals jersey in the picture. And when he saw the jersey, so let's put this in. He grabbed it and he held it up, and so I have a picture of me and Wayne in the Seals jersey, and that helped give the film a lot of legitimacy that I'm grateful for.
Well, I can't wish you enough luck with it. I'm not sure exactly when this episode's going to go out, but hopefully, certainly within the next month or so. I suspect that this podcast will be, it's sort of a persistent opportunity for people to discover or rediscover the story of the Seals, and then secondly, actually be convinced to make a purchase of the movie. But for now, it is available on iTunes for purchase and for rental. I believe also standard definition versus high definition. It seems like there are lots of different flavors, and it's called it's called the California Golden Seals Story. And Mark Greczmiel has been the writer, the director, the producer of it, and has been more than generous with his time, recounting the story of not only him making this film, but also the subject matter of the film and the Golden Seals franchise. So I can't wish you enough luck with it, and it's a hoot. I've watched it twice now, and I think it's a fascinating story and one that needs to be remembered. And I think you should be commended for taking such time and effort and sweat and dollars to do so. And frankly, maybe you should have that YouTube footage from that Sharks game, perhaps as part of the DVD release someday. Huh?
Yeah, possibly. That gets into a whole thing with the with the NHL, but you can watch it on YouTube for free right now if you'd like.
There you go. Well, thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it. Any other items or things, or?
No, the one I did want to mention, like, part of the reason that kind of got me to do this was a gentleman named Brad Kurtzberg wrote a book about the seals, and he was like me, like a Seals fan. He was on the East Coast, and his writing the book helped me want to make the film. And Brad was very generous with his time. I interviewed him for the movie as a Seals expert, and I'm very grateful for him as well. Yeah,
he was very good. He was a very good, almost sort of voice of third-party objectivity and a forceful voice too. So I couldn't agree more. Thank you, and I'll see you online. I'll follow up with you in the days and weeks to come.
All right, thank you.
I appreciate it, Mark. Thank you. Bye-bye. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening, and thanks to my guest, Mark Greczmiel. The California Golden Seal story is available for rental, for download on iTunes. So check it out. I highly recommend it. We only scratched the surface, so there's tons more in that movie. So check it out. And as for us, hey, we're just getting going here. So feel free to rate and review us on iTunes, please, favorably. That would be awesome, especially 5 stars. Go to our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. You'll see all kinds of links and good stuff there. You can subscribe to our email list. You can send us a note with some exceptions to the show or some interesting ideas you might have. Feel free. And then again, on social media, you can find us on Twitter at goodseatsstill. And you'll also see us somewhere there on Instagram and Facebook. This is Tim Hanlon. Thank you for listening. Let us know how you like the show, and we look forward to seeing you sometime soon down the road. Take care.